The Empire had won. It was the kind of victory that echoes through the ages, undeniable, absolute, and crushing. The last remnants of the human resistance had been scattered across the stars, their fleets reduced to nothing more than cosmic debris. The Emperor's voice rang through the galaxy, announcing that the war was over, and the galaxy was now theirs. The Empire had finally triumphed. But in the grand halls of the Imperial Palace, the true cost of this victory had yet to be felt. Grand banners draped the walls, their imperial crest emblazoned in gold. Music filled the air, sweet and triumphant, as the Emperor's closest advisors stood beside him on the balcony, gazing out over a galaxy that would soon kneel before them. The war had been long, painful, but it was over now. The human threat, once thought to be insurmountable, had been eradicated. The last of their fleets had been destroyed, and their resistance had crumbled under the weight of the Empire's might. The Emperor stood tall, his eyes sweeping across the room with an air of certainty. Victory had never been so sweet, and yet something felt off. There was a whisper in the back of his mind, a nagging doubt he couldn't shake. It was insignificant, he told himself, compared to the glory of the moment. The doors to the chamber opened, and a low murmur rippled through the room. A figure entered, barely noticed by the court of imperial elites, but all eyes turned to him. His entrance wasn't marked by fanfare or a herald's trumpet. He was not an imperial officer, nor a general of the vast army. He was not even an alien diplomat from one of the many species the Empire had conquered in its endless expansion. No, this man was something altogether different. He was human, a diplomat, a negotiator, if one could even call him that. His name was Darian Hale, and he had the look of someone who had seen things no one should ever see, the kind of person who carried the weight of history in his eyes. Yet he walked forward with calm, measured steps, as if he were simply a visitor to a celebration, not the symbol of a defeated species. The Emperor's gaze locked on the human, his face a mask of perfect composure. But underneath, the question lingered. What could this human possibly want now that the war was over? Humanity was finished. Their time had come and gone. Hale approached the center of the room, his step steady, his presence unassuming. He was dressed not in the finery of an imperial emissary, but in a simple, yet perfectly tailored suit. His hands were folded behind his back, his expression unreadable. The Emperor cleared his throat, gesturing for him to speak. You stand before me human, at a time when your kind has been utterly defeated. You have nothing left. So tell me, why have you come? A silence filled the room as all eyes turned to the diplomat. Hale didn't flinch. His gaze remained fixed on the Emperor, unwavering, as if he were staring at a piece of architecture rather than the ruler of a galaxy. Finally, Hale spoke. You've forgotten rule number 1. The room fell into an oppressive stillness. Even the Emperor's advisors, who had spent their entire lives learning the delicate politics of power, were momentarily caught off guard by the simplicity of the statement. The Emperor's brow furrowed. He stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. What rule? I have conquered the galaxy, human. What could you possibly have to say to me that matters? Hale didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply stood there, as if waiting for the words to sink in. The murmur of confusion rippled through the room. What game was this diplomat playing? I'll say it again, Hale said, his voice steady but laden with something more, something the Emperor couldn't quite place. You've forgotten rule number 1. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. And what is rule number 1? Never underestimate humanity's ability to survive. The Emperor's lips curled into a thin smile, as if dismissing Hale's words as nothing more than the desperate ramblings of a broken species. Survive? You are finished. Your fleets are ash. Your colonies are lost. What more is there to survive? Hale's eyes never wavered. You think you've won. But the war isn't over. It's only just begun. A chill ran through the room, and the Emperor felt it for the first time, the smallest crack in his certainty. Something was wrong. This human diplomat was not the defeated soul they thought him to be. Let him speak, the Emperor said, his voice betraying the slightest hint of doubt. Hale took a deep breath, and for the first time, he allowed himself to smile. It was a small, knowing smile, one that only someone who knew the true cost of survival could wear. "The Empire may have won the battle," Hale said, his voice calm and steady. "But you've forgotten one simple truth. Humanity never loses. Not when it matters." The Emperor's smile faltered. "And that's when the lights went out. You've forgotten Rule 1. The words hung in the air, a challenge to everything the Empire thought it knew about power. The Imperial Court stood frozen, their celebratory cheers dying in their throats, replaced by a tense silence. Even the Emperor, who had crushed countless civilizations in his long reign, faltered. There was something about the human diplomat standing before him that was unlike anyone else. He had expected defiance, but not like this. Not a statement so simple, yet so loaded. Darian Hale, the human diplomat, didn't flinch under the Emperor's gaze. He wasn't frightened by the vast imperial power that surrounded him. The arrogance of the Emperor, the military leaders, the generals, none of it mattered. To Hale, this was just another negotiation, just another game of strategy, one where his species had outlasted every empire before the Galactic Empire. The Emperor's voice broke the silence, dripping with disdain. "Rule number 1? You speak of rules as though you have any claim to them now. Your species is finished, diplomat. We've wiped out your fleets, your homeworlds, your rebellion. You're nothing but a whisper in the void. So tell me, what rule is it that you think I've forgotten?" Hale's gaze never wavered. "You've forgotten that humanity is the rule breaker. You've forgotten that when the odds are stacked against us, when all seems lost, we fight harder. You've forgotten the most important lesson that every empire before you learned the hard way." The Emperor smirked. "And what lesson is that?" "Survival," Hale answered simply. "We never stop surviving." The room rippled with confusion. The Emperor's advisors exchanged uneasy glances. This was not the response they had expected from a defeated enemy. His calmness unnerved them. Hale, however, stood unwavering. His posture relaxed as if the entire galaxy was at his feet. He had no weapons, no army, no ships. Just words. And he knew those words would sting far more than any weapon could. "You speak as though your fleets are invincible," Hale continued, his voice cool and controlled. "You speak as though you've crushed every hope humanity had. But you haven't. You've only silenced the ones you've seen." The Emperor's patience was wearing thin. "Enough of this nonsense. You're delusional if you think your species has any chance. Your resistance is gone. Your world is ashes." The word stung, but Hale had heard worse. "What you don't understand," he said, "is that humanity doesn't rely on your idea of victory. We don't measure success the way you do. We never did." "Then how do you measure it?" the Emperor asked, his voice no longer mocking, but genuinely curious. The diplomat's confidence had shaken him. There was something in the way Hale carried himself, something that made the Emperor question his certainty. Hale took a step forward. The silence in the room deepened, but it wasn't oppressive. It was filled with anticipation, as if everyone were waiting for the diplomat's next move. "It's not about winning, Emperor," Hale said, his voice softening with a tone of finality. "It's about enduring. You can kill an army. You can destroy a fleet. But you can never destroy what makes humanity what it is. Our will to continue. Our ability to adapt. And more importantly, our hunger for freedom." The Emperor's expression hardened. He waved a hand dismissively, but inside, a ripple of doubt began to form. "Then you are a fool," the Emperor declared. "We will wipe out your last remnants. Your spirit will break." Hale stood firm, not a flicker of fear in his eyes. "You might," he acknowledged, "but it will never be enough. Rule number 1, never underestimate humanity's ability to survive, applies to all of us, no matter how many times you break us down." "Your species will never recover," the Emperor snarled. Hale's lips curled into a faint smile. "That's where you're wrong." Before the Emperor could respond, the first tremor shook the building, subtle at first, like the rumble of an earthquake. The entire Imperial Court lurched forward, their eyes wide with panic. The lights flickered. The great chandeliers overhead shook, their elegant crystals clinking against each other. Hale's gaze remained unbroken, his expression calm, even as the room erupted in chaos. The Emperor shot to his feet, his face pale. "What is happening?" The diplomat didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around, almost as if waiting for something. And then, as the tremors grew louder, he allowed himself a small, knowing smile. "Rule number 1, Emperor," Hale said quietly. "Never forget that when humanity is cornered, it strikes back." Suddenly, the room's main holographic display screen flickered on. A message flashed before the Emperor's eyes, delivered in bold, unmistakable text. "Humanity has never surrendered." The screen went black. The Empire had just received its first true shock. And it wouldn't be the last. The Empire's systems began to fail. It started with a flicker, barely noticeable at first, like the briefest of stutters in the vast network of machines that powered the Imperial Palace. But it didn't stop there. The lights dimmed, the holoscreens blinked, and the voices of the Emperor's advisors faltered as their carefully orchestrated victory celebrations ground to a halt. The Grand Palace, once the epitome of imperial might, suddenly seemed fragile, as if a shadow had fallen over it. Darian Hale didn't react to the chaos. In fact, he barely seemed to notice. His calm demeanor was unnerving to everyone in the room, especially as the tremors of uncertainty ran through the ranks of imperial officers, generals, and advisors. They looked to their leader for direction, but the Emperor himself was now visibly rattled. "What's happening?" the Emperor demanded, his voice rising above the growing panic. "Nothing's working," one of the tech officers stammered, glancing at his console. "All systems are malfunctioning, communications, power grids, everything." Hale remained composed, standing in the middle of the room as if he were merely an observer, no more affected than if he were sitting in a cafe. "It's simple," he said quietly, his voice carrying a certain weight. "You've underestimated humanity again." The Emperor's eyes narrowed, but there was no time for further words. The palace itself seemed to groan under the pressure of the malfunctions. Systems were failing across the entire capital, but no one could explain why or how. The Empire's engineers scrambled to reset protocols, but nothing worked. Even their most secure backups, designed to withstand anything at all, began to blink out one by one. The Emperor's military advisors began barking orders, their voices filled with panic as they struggled to regain control. Their orders came in waves, but the results were the same: nothing. The malfunction spread beyond the palace, now reaching key military installations across the Empire. Starship fleets in orbit were losing connection, their weapon systems going offline. The Emperor's vaunted control was slipping through his fingers. Hale stood motionless, his expression unchanged. He had said nothing, but in that silence, the message was clear. The Empire had no answer. They were at the mercy of whatever force had triggered this catastrophic failure, and they were powerless to stop it. "Where is this coming from?" the Emperor hissed, his composure finally cracking. He turned to Hale, his eyes wild with frustration. "What did you do?" The human diplomat didn't flinch. "Nothing," Hale replied. "I'm not the one who activated this. But humanity did." "Explain yourself," the Emperor growled. Hale took a slow breath, then walked toward the massive view window that overlooked the imperial capital. His gaze was calm, as though he were contemplating something far more important than the chaos unfolding behind him. "Rule number 1 doesn't just mean survival. It means adaptability," he said, turning to face the Emperor. "When your enemies think they've defeated you, when they believe they've crushed your will, that's when you learn that humanity's greatest weapon isn't its armies or its technology. It's the ability to endure, to learn, and most importantly, to strike back when least expected." The Emperor opened his mouth to speak, but the diplomat cut him off with a single raised hand. "You see, Emperor," Hale continued, his tone smooth yet laced with an undeniable edge, "you thought you wiped out humanity's capacity for resistance. But we've always found a way to survive, to adapt. You didn't consider that, did you?" The Emperor's face was ashen now, the blood draining from his features as he realized the truth. This wasn't some isolated incident. This wasn't just a technical malfunction. It was far more deliberate. Who did this? Who's behind it? The Emperor demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. Hale's eyes softened for a fraction of a second before he responded. Humanity never truly surrendered. There are those of us who've been waiting, quietly building what you thought was lost. It's just the beginning. As Hale spoke, a new wave of tremors shook the palace, more violent this time. The lights flickered again, and the Emperor's advisors began scrambling once more, though they now had the air of people who knew they were fighting a losing battle. The Empire's grip on the galaxy, once so firm, was now crumbling before them. The last of the Imperial military control systems went offline, and for the first time in decades, the Emperor felt vulnerable. He turned to his most trusted officer, but even they had no answers. "We've been underestimating humanity for too long," Hale said softly, watching as the last remnants of the Empire's technological prowess slipped away. The Emperor's eyes filled with fury as the reality of his situation began to set in. "This isn't over, Hale. We will find you." Hale only smiled faintly. "You won't. Because we're already here." And as the Empire's power collapsed around them, the diplomat's calm words were the only thing that rang out in the room. "The war has just begun. Humanity never surrendered." The words echoed in the Emperor's mind like a distant drumbeat, louder and more insistent with each passing moment. Every moment that passed inside the Imperial Palace only deepened the gnawing realization that his victory had been nothing more than a fragile illusion. The Empire had assumed that, after years of warfare, the last remnants of humanity would have been completely eradicated. Yet here he was, standing in the heart of the galaxy, completely powerless in the face of something he couldn't comprehend. The emergency systems were still offline. No communication, no connection to his fleets, no link to the Empire's military infrastructure. Panic had already set in among the Imperial officers. But it was different for the Emperor. He had always thrived on control, but now he could feel it slipping away, his once unshakable certainty replaced with a deep, cold dread. The grand halls of the Imperial Palace, which had once hummed with power and authority, now felt like a tomb. The walls closed in on him, the magnificent architecture now serving as a reminder of just how fragile the Empire truly was. It was a feeling he had never known, one that threatened to unravel everything he had worked for. He had thought that by crushing the human resistance, he had secured his reign forever. But the truth was something far worse. Hale stood across from him, watching as the Empire floundered. His eyes, cold and unwavering, never left the Emperor's face. "It's happening, isn't it?" Hale said softly, as though he were commenting on the weather. "You're realizing that nothing's under your control anymore." The Emperor's face hardened. "What have you done?" he demanded, his voice rising with anger. "Who is behind this? What are you playing at, human?" Hale stepped closer, his gaze never wavering. "I told you," he said, his voice low and calm. "Humanity never surrendered. We never stopped fighting. We just adapted. And we waited." The Emperor clenched his fists. "Waited for what? To destroy the Empire? You think you can destroy me?" Hale's lips curled into a faint, almost pitying smile. "No, Emperor. Not destroy you, but expose you for what you truly are. Weak, vulnerable, unprepared." A cold shiver ran down the Emperor's spine as he realized that Hale wasn't speaking about the immediate damage to the Empire's systems or fleets. No, the human diplomat was talking about something much deeper, something that went far beyond a single failure. It was the very heart of the Empire that was at risk. "You're not alone in this," Hale continued, his voice gaining strength. "You never were. Humanity isn't one. It's many. We've learned, over centuries, how to hide in plain sight, how to keep our presence small, our influence subtle. We've infiltrated your systems, your networks, your fleets. And now, when you think you've destroyed us, you find that we've already outlasted you." The Emperor's stomach churned. His mind raced to make sense of Hale's words, to understand what had happened. How could this be? How could humanity have survived in the shadows for so long? He had seen their last fleet fall apart, their last stronghold fall silent. He had believed the war was over. Yet here was Hale, standing before him, with a look of triumph in his eyes. "Where are your fleets, Emperor?" Hale asked, his voice cutting through the Emperor's thoughts. "Where are your reinforcements? Your great military power?" The Emperor's eyes widened as the answer hit him with the force of a blow. His fleets, his ships, they were all gone. Not destroyed, but subverted, turned against him. His own war machine had been infiltrated by humans who had been quietly operating within his forces, waiting for the right moment to strike. "You've been infiltrated," Hale said, almost as if reading the Emperor's thoughts. "You've been sabotaged from within. Every critical system, every military installation. Ours. And now the clock is ticking." The Emperor's heart raced, the blood draining from his face as the implication sank in. It wasn't just that humanity had survived. It wasn't just that they had been playing a long game, biding their time. No, this was something far worse. The Empire had never truly defeated humanity. It had been unknowingly coexisting with a force it didn't even know existed, a hidden, ever-watchful enemy that had learned how to slip past every Imperial defense. "You think you've been in control," Hale said, his voice now almost a whisper. "But you've never been in control. Not once. And now the real fight begins." The Emperor stumbled back, his mind racing for answers. He had underestimated humanity, yes, but he had also overestimated his own invincibility. How could he have missed this? How could his empire, vast and all-consuming, have been so blind? "What do you want, Hale?" the Emperor spat, his voice thick with venom. "What is this? Why do this now? What are you hoping to gain?" Hale smiled faintly. "You think you've defeated us, but you've only exposed yourselves. Rule number 1, Emperor. Never underestimate humanity's will to survive." With a flick of his wrist, Hale activated a small device in his pocket. The room was immediately flooded with a low hum, and the holographic displays surrounding the room flickered to life, showing multiple fleets of human warships closing in on the Empire's key systems. The Empire had been infiltrated at every level, and now, humanity's long game had reached its inevitable conclusion. "You've lost," Hale said simply, his words carrying the weight of inevitability. "And there's nothing you can do to stop it." As the Emperor's eyes locked onto the image of the human fleets converging on his empire, he realized the truth. Humanity hadn't just survived. It had conquered. And the Empire, for all its might, had been nothing more than another fallen empire in a long history of human endurance. This isn't just a fight for survival. The Emperor's breath came in short, desperate gasps as he stared at the once unbeatable empire, now unraveling at the seams. The lights had gone out completely in some sectors, and the halls of power, once teeming with military leaders and advisors, now seemed eerily empty. The great imperial war machine was grinding to a halt. Systems had failed, fleets had turned against them, and the Emperor was left with nothing but the growing realization that the war was lost. Derry and Hale stood before him, calm as ever, as the chaos around them intensified. It was as if the entire imperial apparatus had been reduced to a fragile house of cards, one strong gust of wind, and it would all come tumbling down. But Hale didn't need to say anything more. His presence alone conveyed the gravity of the moment. "How?" The Emperor's voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "How did you do this?" Hale didn't flinch. "It wasn't just about destruction, Emperor. It was about patience. About understanding that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't a fleet or a bomb. It's a simple, unyielding will." The Emperor gritted his teeth, unwilling to give in to the gnawing doubt eating away at him. "This is treason. You can't possibly think humanity can win against the Empire. You've destroyed our systems, crippled our fleets, but that doesn't mean you can win. This isn't over." Hale didn't respond immediately. He glanced around the decaying grandeur of the palace, as though taking in the scene. "Your empire," he began, his voice calm and deliberate, "has always thrived on strength, on power. But what you fail to realize is that power is a fragile thing. It can be shattered with a single crack, a single mistake." The Emperor snarled. "You've thrown everything into chaos. What do you think humanity will gain from this? Do you believe you can overthrow us in a day? In a year?" Hale's gaze sharpened. "No. This isn't about overthrowing you. This is about something far deeper. It's about shifting the balance of power. About showing you that you don't hold all the cards. Humanity didn't need to defeat you in battle. We just needed to remind you that we're still here. The Emperor's fists clenched in fury, but there was something unsettling in Hale's words. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't even desperation. It was something far more calculated, and it made the Emperor uneasy. You've humiliated us. You've turned our power against us, the Emperor spat. What do you want, Hale? What will it take to make you stop? Hale's expression remained unchanged, a hint of something almost like pity in his eyes. What I want, Emperor, isn't something that can be negotiated. It's not something you can give. It's something you've already lost. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. And what's that? Control, Hale replied, his voice unwavering. You never had it, not really. You've always believed you could crush us, that you could force humanity to kneel. But you didn't anticipate this. You didn't anticipate that humanity can adapt to any situation. You've mistaken our will for weakness. A deep silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the imperial palace in disarray. The Emperor's mind raced, trying to grasp the magnitude of Hale's words. For the first time, he wondered if this was more than a single human diplomat's trick. It felt like the entire foundation of the Empire was crumbling beneath his feet. Hale's voice cut through the silence again, this time sharper, more forceful. This is the diplomacy of war, Emperor. You've always thought you could dominate us with sheer force, with weapons and fleets. But now you'll see the true power of diplomacy, the art of war fought not with guns or missiles, but with minds. It's not about taking lives, Emperor. It's about breaking the will to fight. The Emperor recoiled at the coldness in Hale's words. For the first time, he understood that this was no longer just about defeating a military opponent. It was about stripping away the core of his authority, his power. The Empire, for all its strength, was now reduced to a fragile husk, helpless in the face of an enemy who had never truly fought back in the way he expected. You think you've won, the Emperor said, the bitterness in his voice barely masking the deep fear creeping in. You think humanity can just rise from the ashes? But you're wrong. We will crush you. We will rebuild. Hale stepped forward, his presence overwhelming. The war isn't about victory for me, Emperor, he said softly, his tone calm and resolute. It's about ending the idea that one can simply crush another. The truth is, humanity doesn't need to win. We just need to show you that you've lost. With those final words, Hale turned and walked away, leaving the Emperor standing in the midst of his crumbling empire, powerless and unsure. The war was no longer about fleets and battles. It was about something far more dangerous, the collapse of the very foundation that had made the empire what it was. And as the Emperor stared out over the ruins of his once glorious domain, he knew, with a sinking feeling, that the true fight had just begun. You've lost everything. The Emperor's voice cracked, but it didn't matter. The truth had already settled in. He had spent decades, centuries perhaps, building the greatest empire in the galaxy. And in the span of just a few days, it had unraveled. His military, once the pride of the galaxy, was shattered. His fleets crippled. His once feared forces had been exposed for the frail, vulnerable machine they truly were. And it was all thanks to a single human diplomat. Darian Hale stood before him, unflinching, his calm eyes never leaving the Emperor's face. Despite the crumbling empire around them, despite the chaos spilling through the grand halls of the imperial palace, Hale remained the epitome of composure. You failed, Hale said softly, his voice carrying the weight of finality. You thought you could conquer humanity. You thought you could bend us to your will. But you were wrong. The Emperor gritted his teeth, his anger barely contained. You think this is over, human? He spat. This is merely a setback. I'll rebuild. The Empire will rise again. Hale shook his head, his expression unchanging. You still don't understand, do you? This wasn't about defeating you in battle. This was about exposing the truth. You never had control. You never had the power you thought you did. A bitter laugh escaped the Emperor's lips, a hollow sound that echoed through the empty hall. You speak of truth, but your words are nothing more than the desperate musings of a defeated species. You've done nothing but delay the inevitable. The Empire is eternal. Hale took a step closer, his presence overwhelming in its quiet authority. You keep saying that, Emperor, that the Empire is eternal, that your power is unbreakable. But the truth is, empires fall. Yours is no different. The Emperor's eyes flickered with fear for the first time, though he tried to mask it with bravado. You're wrong. I'll make you regret this. I'll hunt down every last remnant of your species and crush them beneath my heel. Hale smiled faintly. And that's where you've misunderstood. You don't get it, do you? Rule number 1 isn't just about survival. It's about humanity's refusal to be broken. You think you can kill us, imprison us, wipe us from the galaxy. But we will always endure. And that's what terrifies you. The Emperor's chest tightened as the weight of Hale's words began to sink in. He had spent his entire life believing in the invincibility of his empire. He had conquered worlds, crushed civilizations, and bent species to his will. But he had never faced an enemy like humanity, an enemy that refused to break, no matter how hard it was pushed. What are you saying? The Emperor asked, his voice hoarse. That I've lost? That the Empire has fallen? Hale's gaze never wavered. Yes, you've lost. You can't even see it yet, but you've already lost everything that mattered. The Emperor stepped back, his mind reeling. He couldn't accept it. The thought that his empire, his legacy, could be brought down by a single human diplomat was inconceivable. Yet the signs were undeniable. The fleets had turned against him, his military was in disarray, and now the entire galaxy was beginning to turn its gaze on the chaos his empire had created. I won't surrender, the Emperor muttered, but the words felt hollow, even to him. The weight of his failure pressed down on him, suffocating him. You don't have to, Hale said, his tone almost gentle. Because you already have. For the first time, the Emperor saw the full extent of his defeat. It wasn't just about losing this battle or that fleet. It was about losing everything that had made the Empire what it was. Humanity hadn't just survived. They had revealed the Empire's inherent weakness. And in doing so, they had proven that the Empire was never invincible. It was just another empire, destined to fall like all the others before it. The Emperor slumped against the wall, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his collapse. What now? He whispered, his voice barely audible. Hale paused, his eyes lingering on the Emperor. Now, the galaxy will change. Your reign is over. But humanity's time is just beginning. The diplomat's words were not a threat, they were a promise. And the Emperor knew, deep in his gut, that Hale was right. The Empire was no longer the supreme power in the galaxy. Humanity had not just survived, they had laid the foundation for something new, something stronger. The Empire's era was finished. As Hale turned and walked away, the Emperor remained in the silence of a shattered throne room, his empire crumbling around him. The once proud walls, which had stood for centuries, seemed to bow under the weight of their own history. The final rule had been revealed. Empires rise, but they also fall. And humanity? Humanity would endure. The Emperor could only watch as the last of his empire faded into the darkness, the future of the galaxy slipping through his fingers.